Hi, I'm Catherine Alexander. I'm founder of the Bridge to Partnership and the Coming Home Project. And I'm here to talk about regenerative leadership. Leadership has got to change. We need to be different in this very different space. So I'm going to share with you today just a little bit about one of the more significant parts of being a regenerative leader, and that has to do with seeing in systems. Now, what does that mean and how do you do it, right? So the thing about systems thinking, which is a field of thought which has been around for 50, 70 years, I think. It's fairly new, fairly young, actually. But it allows us to literally see systems and patterns. And those are so key. And patterns are fundamental to a lot of the work that I do. And certainly that's where the resilient value set came from as we look at Mother Earth and how she works and notice the patterns that make life thrive. But when you're seeing in systems, you're seeing in wholes. Now, wholes are a collection of parts. Kind of confusing, maybe? But think of your body. It's a whole thing. But it has all sorts of parts. It has fingers and hands and arms and elbows and ears and noses and chins, all sorts of parts. But they're cohesive, they're all together. And they all function together as a whole. And it's really awkward and difficult to take a part out. It doesn't function so well, no matter what that part is. Not that you can't get along, but it doesn't really work well. It doesn't work the way it was intended. So a system is a whole that's a collection of parts that come together for a purpose. Your life is a purpose. But when we think of other things, it kind of opens up some really unique insights. So think about your family as a whole. Think of the members of your family. Those are parts. But together, all of you create what you call a family. How often have you thought of that and what that looks like? What might somebody from the outside see about that family that you've created? How would you describe the health and the robustness and the resiliency of that family? When you think about these things, you begin to see how the parts contribute, but they actually contribute to the whole. And that's one of the big mindset changes, because we think of working with the parts. So you'd work with each member of the family to make them better, to make them more polite, more open to listening, more amenable to experimenting maybe, or open to forgiveness, those kinds of things. And those are all good things. There's nothing wrong with it. But when you think about what the whole system needs to thrive, out of all of those things, maybe forgiveness would be the thing that becomes most important. To actually cement those relationships and to get them to flower together. What would a really thriving, regenerative family look like? How would it be different from what currently exists? These are pretty deep questions, and they come from seeing the whole, not getting caught up in all the parts and pieces. So the same is true in your place of work. Think of that company as a whole. What does it need as a whole to work better? Often that will show up problems between the parts. It's very interesting to me, and it's been very interesting for many years, that often we create parts of a company that are in competition with each other. or parts that don't talk to each other when they really need to. So you have sales and you have billing, and then you have the people that clean up accounts that don't pay. Those three groups should talk together because they support or undermine each other depending on how they're working. Often they don't. And they even can be rewarded for actions which make it harder for other parts to work. So that decreases the ability of the whole company, the whole organization to function well. So thinking about wholes is very important. Think about your city as a whole. We get caught up in things like homelessness and the police department, and those are all very important things. But what would happen to make that city as a whole work better? How would the police department interact with the rest of the city in a way that would make the city more vibrant, not just safe, which means dealing with the parts that are out of balance and creating problems, but it doesn't really hit the whole, does it? It's a constant battle with parts. That's often what's true, because that's how we understand policing. We don't think of it as something that contributes to the whole thrivability of the city. How would that change what the police department does or how it acts? If it was really concerned about the whole city thriving, what sorts of partnerships would it make that it doesn't have now? Government is the same way. City Hall thinks about myriads of different things. There's streets and there's sewers, there's water, there's all these different things, traffic and building buildings. But they don't all come together as a whole. They're all doing their thing, working hard on parts, but not thinking about the whole city and how they interface in order to make the city better. They're all silos doing their own part things. So thinking about wholes is a really key new way of thinking. And when you think about wholes, then you also begin to see patterns between the different parts and patterns between different wholes. So are there patterns in a family that are reflected in an organization? Now, if it's family run, you will really see that. But we often ignore that in other kinds of organizations. And yet everybody brings to work their family experience, how they deal with authority, whether they've felt valued as a person or diminished in their value by their parents. And they bring those attitudes to work, and those attitudes flow out into the organization. And the same is true of the city. So every system is nested in a bigger system. And those bigger systems influence how the nested systems work. So what could the city do that would support the family, not make it more difficult, but make it easier for the family to live? What kinds of things might a city do to make that happen? That is revolutionary to think that way. You begin to see ideas and possibilities that didn't exist before. And the good news is that it works. When you start to see the whole, then everything comes alive. And it's aliveness that makes the difference. That's what regenerative leadership is all about, is aliveness. Fostering aliveness in every aspect of experience. So how about the planet? The planet is a whole. It's certainly composed of parts. Oh my gosh. So how can we foster those relationships, our relationships with the other parts, in a way that makes the whole planet better. That's the task we have now. That's what we're working on. And understanding patterns of behavior between parts and between wholes is a really shortcut way to figure out how to do that. The problem with dealing with parts is that you can't create leverage in the system. And it really can distort your actions because you're focused here when if you saw up here, maybe there's actually something you could do up here that would change that. So focusing here kind of blinds you to the bigger picture. And resources, we have so much time, so much energy, so much money, so much whatever. And when you focus it all here, it doesn't leave much for up here. I mean, it really does make a difference whether the potholes are fixed or not. When the potholes are fixed, people feel much better about living in the city. But not fixing potholes is one way to balance the budget and to use that money, divert it into other purposes. But it doesn't support the whole to do that. So parts actually can be distracting and disturbing and can set up confusing and misunderstandings about what the real thing is. So systems are really important. There are some other concepts that I'm just going to very quickly talk about that really do make a difference. Complexity is complex adaptive systems. Now that's an interesting idea, don't you think? Because systems, wholes, us, every whole is constantly adapting to its experience in the world, which is that of other wholes, right? And we're constantly adapting to how we're treated by other people, how we're treated by the system, how we're treated by our city, our business, our place of work. That impacts other things in our life. When you're mistreated at work, you can go home and take it out on your family, who has no idea what you're doing or why, and it has nothing to do with them, but they're at the brunt of it. So understanding the behavior of complex adaptive systems is interesting and very useful. And what I just expressed was nonlinear cause and effect. So what happens in one place can show up in another place, sometimes years later, actually. So it's hard to know what cause and effect is. We're so used to linear. So if I push it, it moves. And that's not how nature works. You can push it and something else happens way over here. So understanding that gives us a lot more compassion and gets us out of the blame game, I think, in a very rich way. Another concept is networks. Living things connect. You have a whole series of connections in your family and in your friends. Business relationships, personal relationships. There's a lot of ways you touch the system in ways you have no idea, no understanding about, just because you're connected. So looking at those connections and understanding how to work with them makes a really big difference. And then collective behavior. There's something happens when a group of life forms come together. One of them is us. Our body biome is a group of life forms that came together to create us. We could not live without them, and they have no interest in what we're doing unless we're happy. The happiness feeds them. Our joy in life feeds them. And our disappointment and despair robs them of their life force as well. So in that case, they care about what we do. But on another level, they don't. They don't need to. So collective behavior, these are interesting concepts that make a huge difference in how we engage with the world. So regenerative leadership is really about planetary consciousness, planetary awareness, learning how life has made life happen and thrive for millions and millions and millions of years. Now, there are some easy steps in regenerative leadership, like tending the earth. It may not seem easy to you, but trust me, it is really not that difficult. And it's so rewarding and so enhancing and so mandatory. We must take care of the planet now. That's what's being called for more than anything else. Taking care of the planet is soil and mini forests. I mean, these are two really simple, very profound, incredibly impactful things that we can do. But they pale in comparison to changing our thoughts, our ideas, our worldview, how we see ourselves and world. That's the real work. To go from being separate to being connected, to go from power over to power with. Huge, huge differences. And that's the work we're really called to do. So with regenerative leadership, I call you to both tasks, to take on the easy stuff first and then work with me to do the harder things so that we can keep the success that we're making. And to do that, you can visit my website, which is bridge2partnership.com, and see the offerings that we have on webinars, classes, and trainings. This is your chance to really re-engage with the world, get coached, or join us in the webinars, classes, or trainings, or both. I look forward to working with you, and I want to hear comments in the chat below.